Chapter 3, Puyallup proper, late morning, day 1. Following the four-wheel drive, I saw an immense steel beam for a gate and concrete-sealed bollards that someone had a manual crank mechanism to operate. This place is on lockdown, I said quietly, but where'd the military hardware come from? We drove for some blocks, and I thought, we hadn't been here a while, and I really think I'd remember them having those vehicles before. The hardware was all supposed to all be gone. How did it get here? I wondered out loud. You'll have a chance to ask, I think, our driver spoke up to my prior question. As he said that, we finished turning some corners and pulled up to a huge lodge parking lot. There were armed guards everywhere at the perimeter of the lot, more around the perimeter of the building, and probably a bunch we didn't even see. This looks cool, I realized I said aloud after the fact. An off-road vehicle stopped and motioned to us where to park, and we fell in line behind our lead vehicle. Then the vehicle behind us did the same. The folks in the lead truck jumped down, so we all did the same. I looked and noticed other pickup trucks in the lot. Saw lots of decals that I was used to seeing before the collapse adorning their shells. Family reunion, huh? I mumbled. One of my friends noticed too, and he perked up a bit more than usual. We walked up to the checkpoint before walking into the building. One of the guards looked like a lead and said, "Respectfully, you and your vehicles will be well protected. We ask you to disarm upon entering. There will be a place for your arms." We all nodded. We'd been used to it from prior ops. It wasn't as big of a deal to anyone if there was actually an appropriate team running security. We started to funnel inside. There were people to hand our weapons to. The scene was quite comical, with everyone having a long gun and at least one sidearm, if not two or three. More than three sidearms were pretentious, of course. I took my bump helmet off and clipped it to my bag I was wearing. Hopefully I wouldn't smack anyone with it. One of these days I really needed to upgrade to an airman helmet so I didn't stick out. Anyway, it was everyone's time to show off just how many they had. The teasing had already begun. They had a tray for my sidearms and a heavy coat hanger for my AR. I unholstered my main sidearm and kept it pointed in a safe direction. I then ejected the mag into a bin and racked the slide upside down. A bullet popped out and into the bin. I took out my concealed pistol and performed the same function. Then I took off my AR and performed the same function a third time. He was very kind and smiled reassuringly, then gave me a bracelet to put on. I assumed it was some kind of RFID tag, and then I went to go find my buddies to sit with. I followed the sound of talking, and upon entering the dining room and passed many more armed guards, it was a who's who of all of our buddies from the past. All of the groups had gotten back together. This must be very serious indeed. There was food, and during it a presentation. Each of the leaders essentially presented a different high-level part of the plan that they needed to do, why, and how it fit into the larger operation. Basically, there were tons of moving parts, and so it all had to be done at once. While we listened, we ate fresh seafood and freshly baked bread. It was amazing. The leaders went to the different sections of the dining room, and all of our empty plates were removed by staff. By the call of names, new groups were formed and assigned. I got assigned to one of the two maritime groups. Apparently my experience with a certain luxury yacht had got some attention from upper management. There was a puddle pirate group and a sinful squid group. I was part of the sinful squid group. I could only assume that meant we would be in deep water. Many other groups were named, but I began to tune them out and meet my new temporary group. I shook hands with all my buddies from my stronghold and some buddies hanging out from other strongholds. We all gave each other the look. I felt like I had to say something. "See you guys on the other side," I said, unable to think of much else inspiring, "and take care of my freaking cat." "Take care of it yourself," one of them chided, and everyone laughed. We all stood there in silence for a second. Nothing else needed to be said. I turned to go and meet my new group. The majority of them I was familiar with as I got closer, as more of their names were called, having worked with them before. Apparently they'd asked for me specifically, A few guys from down in the Bremerton area, and a few from the immediate area, and a few from up north. Chapter 4, Planning, Afternoon, Day 1. We went over our plan for about an hour and reviewed intel. The discussions were all out of the earshot of the other groups, although the puddle jumpers would come over and bounce an idea or two here and there. Both teams were a conglomeration of SEALs, Navy, Marines, and Coast Guard, although there were some that appeared to be fishermen as well to keep us to the proper tactically functioning number. Each team had 13 members, which I don't doubt is a coincidence. We went over more of the plans, and other teams started funneling out. I guess that everyone had to travel different distances and thus had different time frames to adhere to. It seemed like there was a team to intercept the current pre-processed shipments, another for post-processed shipments, and another to lock down the abandoned processing facility. The native tribe seemed to be the ones that would lock down the pier. There was a final team that looked pretty secretive. I had to guess that they were going to go to each of the city-states in tandem to sabotage the fuel trucks. That would be the riskiest job of all. The transports were all under medium guard, probably lazy, assuming everyone's out of fuel or that the mission wouldn't draw attention or scrutiny. The groups on our side would likely set up roadblocks to stop the trucks, take the drivers as prisoners, disable the GPSs, and then drive around fueling as many farm vehicles and tanks as possible. We didn't need to hoard the fuel, we needed it distributed, and then just enough for ourselves to where we could be operational again. They couldn't exactly come after everyone to get their fuel back if it was properly distributed. That was just my guess anyway. I figured I might as well ask a question though while it was on my mind. I knew we had to be running low on fuel for our Navy also, so I asked, "How are we fueling up our vessel?" "Great point," our coordinator responded. "We only have enough fuel left for a one-way trip. The drilling platform has a partial refinery on board that is only appropriate for maritime engines. It refines the fuel enough to where we can use it for our ships. It then passes to a fully functional refinery to complete the process for modern engines, though." I nodded. "Anyone else?" he asked. Everyone shook their heads. "Alright, I won't tell you what to do because you're adults, but I do know that we depart at dusk. We expect you to be on the dock at 1600 for prep and lunch. Eat, rest, do whatever we have to do, but be at the dock at 1600. We all nodded and relaxed. I looked around to see if any of my buddies from the other groups were around, but everyone had dispersed. I looked through my group to see if anyone caught my eye, and nobody did. They all piled out, apparently already having planned what they were going to do. They got their arms from the quartermaster at the front desk and then headed out. The pier wasn't a super long walk, so I wasn't worried about making it in time, but hated to be around alone. I sat and looked at my notes I'd taken, noticing nobody was in a rush to kick me out. The coordinator came over to me and sat down, possibly aware of my mindset. What's on your mind there, Mr. Analyst?" I looked up halfway and nervously chuckled. "Just going over the plan. I think we have everything in place." He responded back, "Let's go over it at dinner. I don't mind the feedback." That made me smile and I perked up. I put my notepad away and my pen in my pocket. We got our firearms at the front desk, racked the slides to put around in the chamber, and headed back out. We headed out to the parking lot and I looked around to see what was in place. I remembered there being a bunch of motorcycles there, and they were gone now, of course. More than half of the other vehicles were gone as well. Still some security watching the perimeter, the missing motorcycles being the most obvious because they'd taken up the entire front row of not parking spaces right up against the building. We walked a block or so in relative silence and passed some totem poles. I could smell the water, but not too bad. I never liked the smell here, but I figured I'd get used to it soon and then would forget about the smell altogether. I always loved the totem poles here and had a massive respect for them. It was an eagle and a bear and a coyote, I thought, and some others I didn't quite recognize. I always wanted one of my own, but by the time I could have actually got one, I would have been accused by all the no-life jerks around me for misappropriating culture. You couldn't just own anything and display it out of respect. Everything had to be a fight. Not here, though. There were old totem poles and new ones proudly pronounced throughout the route. We got to the restaurant and no cars in the parking lot. I guess that was to be expected with the fuel situation. The coordinator for our team opened the door and waved me in. It was interesting that there were still functioning restaurants. There was a chalkboard with a menu which consisted of potatoes, beets, artichokes, peppers, and other aromatics. Apparently they'd been able to secure and maintain some large gardens. The staff saw who I was with and ushered us to a private corner of the dining room. She said thank you to us several times, and we both nodded confidently. I was unaware of what she was thanking us for, but I would work my best to earn her praise as soon as I could.